So the Las Vegas Raiders began mandatory minicamp today, and based on the early reports, it was quite a day for the Las Vegas Raiders. Jakorian Bennett got the first interception of minicamp, but it was Michael Mayer who continued his dominance for the Raiders early on in camp. Plus, Raiders defensive line coach Robert Leonard talked about why he thinks this is the best defensive line he's ever coached in his 14 years in the NFL. But before we get into that, make sure you guys are subscribed to this channel. Let's go ahead and get right into this video. One of the things I really wanted to see from the Las Vegas Raiders as we started mandatory minicamp was the health of some of our players. Jackson Powers-Johnson went down in OTAs in that very first week, and he did not practice from that point forward. And today was mandatory minicamp. Today was the first day that we had guys in the building. And Jackson Powers-Johnson was healthy. He was out there. He was practicing. He was doing his thing. And to me, that's exactly what you wanted out of Jackson Powers-Johnson. You wanted to see this guy be healthy. You wanted to see this guy learn the playbook as the offense is being installed. You wanted this guy to ask those questions and really have that advantage as opposed to a guy like Tyree last season who was not with the Las Vegas Raiders. Instead, he was off to the sideline rehabbing. But Jackson Powers-Johnson is good to go. He'll obviously be competing to start at left guard. I think he's going to end up beating out Cody Whitehair, but he is technically competing with Whitehair. They're rotating in and out during the 11-on-11 period, which makes sense. You don't want to just give this guy the job, but I find it very, very hard to believe that Jackson Powers-Johnson will not start over Cody Whitehair.
I like to play like a psycho on the field, and to have fans all around you that are just as psycho as you. I love it. Bring it. Fit right in.
Speaking of an injury, we actually got some insight into Kolton Miller's injury. So Kolton Miller, who obviously missed all of OTAs, came into mandatory minicamp, and some people thought maybe he didn't practice at that point because it was voluntary, and maybe he just didn't want to be out there and really put the effort in. But that was not the case. Tashawn Reed of The Athletic actually put a tweet out saying that Kolton Miller is rehabbing from off-season shoulder surgery. So there you guys have it. Tashawn Reed is one of the only guys that has actually put this information out there, so shout out to him. He's saying Kolton Miller is rehabbing from off-season shoulder surgery. Now, we know the past 2 seasons, Miller has actually missed time with the shoulder injury, and we're not 100% sure what it was, but it's caused him from weeks 11 through the end of the season in both of the last 2 seasons to miss multiple games. So it is good that Miller got that surgery, and he should be good to go as training camp approaches. But he did not practice today. Not a big deal. He'll be good to go as we kind of go forward. And then finally, the other update that we were kind of waiting to hear was the Davante Adams update. Not that anybody expected this guy to hold out, but rumors started circulating a little bit that Davante Adams, he isn't at OTAs. Does he care? Is he, whole new coach? Like, why would he not be there? And again, it is voluntary OTA, so again, it doesn't really matter. But he was actually officially out there today. All right, so Davante Adams was running routes. He was out there with the guys. He was doing his thing. And to me, I'm excited for the Raiders as we go forward. Because it's not just Jackson Powers-Johnson and Davante Adams and then Kolton Miller, but it's the rest of the team, right? These guys are actually buying into the Las Vegas Raiders. They're buying into what's being sold by Antonio Pierce, what's being sold by Tom Telesco, Patrick Graham. Mark Davis at the top is doing a great job right now, allowing his guys that he's hired to kind of make things right and get the Raiders on this right track. And I would argue that this is the best roster we've had, overall roster, in like the past 6 or 7 years. Like, I would make that argument. I know our quarterback position isn't perfect, but outside of that, I can't think of a time when we had a better wide receiver room, a better defensive line room, a better linebackers room, a better secondary. Like, I can't think of a time that we had better tight ends than the 2 guys we have right now in the last 7 to 10 years. Right? I think the Las Vegas Raiders roster is stacked across the board, and I'm excited to kind of see what they do this season. In other news, we got Jack Jones playing wide receiver at mandatory minicamp. What's interesting about this clip is Jack Jones actually looks good out there. Right? Jack Jones is actually catching the ball on a quick pass or screen, not 100% sure exactly what it is, but he catches the ball and you got a defensive back on the other side, and he makes a nice cut, and you can kind of see that playmaking ability that Jack Jones has. And it's interesting because is Jack Jones going to actually play some wide receiver this season? I've always heard Jack Jones talk. I've kind of seen his play style, and he reminds me of a player kind of like Deion Sanders a little bit, right? Not saying he's exactly Deion Sanders, But you saw those 2 interceptions he had last season, one against the Chiefs, one against the Chargers. Just the way he timed it, just the way he read the play, the one-handed interception behind his back against the Chargers. To me, that reminded me of Deion Sanders, right? That the way he played, right? And to me, Jack Jones catching the ball on the offensive side, is it possible that he'll play a little bit of wide receiver this season? I don't know. He probably won't, but I find it interesting anyways. He did take a couple of snaps on the offensive side. The wide receivers, as you guys can see in that clip, are standing on that same side as Jack Jones. So this was obviously a wide receiver drill. Going up against the cornerbacks, obviously Jack Jones is on the other side. And after doing his drill, probably just swapped sides and then decided to run some routes. Pretty cool to see Jack Jones out there with the wide receivers running routes. Hopefully he catches at least one pass this season on the offensive side. And some other news, Jakorian Bennett, man, he got the first interception of the day. Levi Damien put it out there that Jakorian Bennett gets the first pick of the day on Aidan O'Connell's pass. What's interesting about Bennett is that this guy, early on in the process, has looked good, right? Early on in the process, Jakorian Bennett was taking first team reps, and not only was he taking first team reps, the rotation kind of died off. But I believe it was the first practice that Bennett and Faison were swapping and kind of rotating in with the first string group. Come into week 2 and 3, that no longer happened. Bennett was the starting guy. He was the guy that the Las Vegas Raiders said, we're gonna roll forward with this guy as the guy, right? And he ended up getting the first pick of the day on Aidan O'Connell. Aidan O'Connell was obviously out there with the first team guys. O'Connell's looked good in his own right as well. We'll talk about him a little bit later on. But Jakorian Bennett is doing his thing, and I'm excited to see what the Raiders' defensive back room is going to look like, because I think it's severely underrated. I think they're going to have so much more success than people realize. And I think a big part of that could be a guy like Nate Hobbs. Nate Hobbs is going into a year where he's probably going to get a contract extension here soon. He's going into his 4th season. Usually guys that are playing in the slot, to me, they take 3 or 4 years. And I think this is the year that Nate Hobbs is going to make multiple game-changing plays, right? Strip, sacks, maybe he punches the ball out of a wide receiver. Maybe he makes a key tackle on 3rd and 4, and it gives the Raiders an opportunity to go down and win the game on the offensive side. I think this is going to be the year that Nate Hobbs is going to take that next step. In fact, defensive backs coach Ricky Manning recently said Nate Hobbs was the key to unlocking the Las Vegas Raiders defense. And Nate Hobbs was actually asked about that statement today. Check out what he had to say.
I feel like it means it's year 4 for me. And for me, I'm the difference maker. It's a lot of difference makers on this team. But if I play at a high level, I'm just telling you what people tell me. When I play at a high level, people tend to follow. You know what I'm saying? I tend to ignite the defense. It's not, you know what I'm saying? Me saying that, I try to come out there and do the best I can every day for the team, but they telling me that. So other people telling me that, I just take that personal. And I feel like we just got a whole bunch of me's on the defense for real, fire starters. And shouts out to them, you know what I'm saying? I'm just trying to do my part.
I think the Las Vegas Raiders defensive back room is going to be very, very good this season, and I'm excited to watch Nate Hobbs, Jack Jones, Jakorian Bennett, and some of the rookies and UDFAs that we have as well. I think there's so much upside in that group. But switching into the other group on the defensive side, arguably the best group, that's going to be the Las Vegas Raiders defensive line. Now, before we jump forward, I want to take a second to tell you guys about the best way to play fantasy sports. In my opinion, it is the easiest way to get into some NFL action with Underdog Fantasy and their pick'em game. You basically pick your favorite players, or any player for that matter. You pick either higher or lower, and you can 20x your money. And there's always specials going on with Underdog Fantasy when it comes to their booster picks, some of the payout bonuses that you can get. And Underdog makes it super, super easy for you to win some extra cash. So make sure you guys check out that link down below and go check out Underdog Fantasy, the official sponsor of this channel. Let's go ahead and just get right back into this and just kind of talking about the one key addition that the Raiders had in Christian Wilkins. We had heard last week that this guy was having a really, really solid OTA period, right? And then he came out to mandatory minicamp, and apparently he's been popping off, according to Levi Edwards, who works for the Las Vegas Raiders. He said Christian Wilkins is popping off today. Geez. And it's crazy to hear that, because Christian Wilkins is one of those guys that you would say is a top 5 to 6 defensive tackle in the NFL. He's one of those guys that's a truly game changer on the inside. And I always say this, having a defensive tackle that's a top 5 guy is more valuable than having a defensive end that's a top 5 guy, right? A D tackle changes the game more than a defensive end does, right? And defensive tackles are often a lot more rare, right? You probably can find 30 or 40 good defensive ends in the NFL, and you'll probably find 10 good defensive tackles in the NFL, right? Defensive tackles are so much more valuable, in my opinion, than a defensive end is. And for the Raiders to add Christian Wilkins, it really does change everything for the Raiders. Even Rob Leonard, the Las Vegas Raiders defensive line coach, agrees with me. Check out what he had to say.
It's one of the best groups I've been around in 12 years. It's a lot of fun. But, I mean, what's crazy is it's the same group plus him from last year. So, like, last year, I remember what people were saying as well going into the season, you know. I mean, John Jenkins and Adam Butler were like camp bodies. You know what I'm saying? So, and then you add a guy that they're familiar with. It's a lot of fun to come work every day.
So it's very clear, right? The Raiders had a good defensive line last season. They're coming into this season. They've added Christian Wilkins. That's all they really have done. Yeah, they lost Below Nichols and Jerry Tillery, but those guys were kind of average football players. I think the guys that really stood out to me last season was Adam Butler and John Jenkins. I think those two guys really stood out, specifically with the role that they kind of played for the Raiders. And this season, not only did we bring those two guys back, we brought all the defensive ends back, and we added Christian Wilkins, an arguably top 5 defensive tackle. I think the Raiders' defense is going to be so much better this season based off of adding Christian Wilkins. And Rob Leonard's right. This is the best defensive line that, not only he's had, but this is probably one of the best defensive lines I've seen the Raiders have. Right? I know the defensive line years back when we had Richard Seymour as well as Tommy Kelly, that was a pretty damn good defensive line as well. The defense that year was pretty good, generally speaking. We had Kirk Morrison, Thomas Howard, rest in peace to him. We had Nnamdi Asomugha at some point as well, right? So we had some good players on the defensive side. But I think this defensive line is arguably better than that defensive line. When you look at guys like Maxx Crosby and Malcolm Koonce, you cannot single block these guys. These guys will get after it if you try to do that, right? And then at the same time, you have Christian Wilkins, who's an absolute difference maker. Adam Butler is a guy that's a great pass rusher. He's coming back as well. The Raiders' defensive line is going to be very, very, very good. And the wild card with the Raiders defensive line, honestly, is the 2 young guys, right? It's the 2 guys that were both rookies last year, and they're going into their second season this season. It's almost like, we think about the Raiders defensive line, but we don't think about the fact that we took a guy with the 7th overall pick, as well as I believe he was the 67th overall pick last season. That is Tyree Wilson, as well as Byron Young. We don't think about these 2 guys who are defensive linemen. We don't think about what they can end up developing into in their second seasons, right? So to me, when I look at those guys, I think about what the upside with the Raiders could ultimately end up being. Now, we saw Byron Young last year was a healthy scratch a ton. We saw Tyree Wilson really struggle at the defensive end spot, especially early on. But Rob Leonard talked a little bit about those 2 guys as well. Check out what he had to say about them.
Mindset, attitude, not giving a what people think. Hey, that's wrong. Do it again. Do the drill again. Working to the standard of what we've created in that room and really as a defense. It's a mindset, it's a mentality over anything else. He's displayed that in training camp. And so, like, when you're not good at something and then pushing through it and working towards getting better at it, that is a mindset because there's people around you, they see you do a crappy rep. No, wrong, do it again. And attacking the ball, running all the way down the field like 98, punching at it, being an a-hole. Disrupting practice. If you develop that mindset, the results are just like, it'll happen. Same thing with him. That kid knows how to play football. It's a style of play he's still developing. It's a finish. It's more than just doing your job, but emphasizing the finish with him. He's really smart. He's really intelligent. He wants to be right. But it's playing with that edge at a consistent level. He's shown flashes of it, and I think he's had a hell of a spring doing those things.
I would make the argument that the Raiders' defensive line this season is going to be the best defensive line in the NFL. All right, with just the 4 guys that are going to be out there starting with Maxx, Malcolm, Christian, and Butler, I think those 4 guys is arguably the best defensive line in the NFL. And when you bring in guys like John Jenkins, Byron Young, Tyree Wilson, Matthew Butler could take a massive leap in year 3. He's shown flashes as well. I think the Las Vegas Raiders defensive line is arguably going to be the best, deepest, most versatile unit in the NFL. Right, Byron Young's a guy that I've kind of overlooked a little bit, but with Rob Leonard saying that he's a kid that knows how to play football and he's still developing, He's smart, and I don't know Byron Young, so I can't tell you if he's smart or not. I've never had a conversation with him. But if Rob Leonard is saying that Byron Young is smart, I think that means something, right? So you give a defensive tackle 2 to 3 years and see where he's at down the line. I'm excited to see Byron Young's development this season. I want to switch focus and get into the offensive side at this point. One of the interesting things that we heard coming out of camp was that Aidan O'Connell is, swapping with Gardner Minshew, but Aidan O'Connell is clearly the number one guy at the moment. Now, Aidan O'Connell did throw an interception earlier on, but Aidan O'Connell has looked good as well. There's been a ton of reports coming out that Aidan O'Connell has been looking good. He's a lot more focused, right? He's a lot better. The ball's coming out quicker. There's a little bit more zip on the ball. He's moving better as well, right? I think that was the one thing that a lot of us kind of thought about last season is how will he be like when it comes to extending plays, when it comes to being able to climb the pocket and navigate the pocket. When you think about the Raiders' offensive line being improved this season, as well as Aidan O'Connell taking a step up in his development, I think the Raiders should be so much better on the offensive side this season as well. And that doesn't include the fact that Mayer's taking the year 2 leap. Brock Bowers is coming in, are arguably the best player coming out of this past class. You look at guys like, Davante Adams. You look at guys like Jakobi Meyers, and these guys are now in the Luke Getsy scheme, right? Which is going to be a little bit different than last season. And Davante Adams likes the Luke Getsy scheme. It kind of allows him to get back to things that he was doing with the Green Bay Packers. On top of that, you look at what Scott Turner had to say about Aidan O'Connell and his development, and it kind of fires you up a little bit.
Aidan's is such a great, focused, young man. I mean, he's obviously a second-year player, but he conducts himself, like a veteran. And he's got a great balance of understanding, leadership and work and talking to the right way, but also, it's not fake, and he's one of the guys, too. He can connect with the other players. Because I've seen it that way where a quarterback, especially like a young player, is so focused on being the leader that he kind of loses sight of kind of the brotherhood and the camaraderie that this game is so important, obviously when you face adversity. And I think the work that he's put in, he's earned the respect and the trust of the other players in this locker room. And then he's also, he's got a good sense of humor, so he's good, being one of the guys and connecting to people as well.
Now, of course, Aidan O'Connell has all the upside in the world, right? The guy could become a really, really good football player. But in order for him to actually do that, I think the key thing for O'Connell will honestly come down to the playmakers he has, right? Jakobi Meyers, Davante Adams, how they kind of fit in with the new scheming system, Brock Bowers, as well as Michael Mayer. And keep in mind, Michael Mayer is still dominating, right? He is still out there doing his thing. And Scott Turner was asked about those two guys and how you can kind of utilize them as well. And he basically told us that, you can get these two guys out there in the personnel grouping. It's not just that you're coming out there in the 12 personnel where you have one running back, 2 tight ends, right? Because Brock Bowers could be a wide receiver, right? So in that instance, if Michael Mayer's on the inside and Brock Bowers is out wide, then you're technically in the 11 personnel, right? Mayer at the same time has been crushing OTAs. He can easily line up in the slot, and then Brock Bowers can line up in the opposite slot. So now you're coming out with just one running back, right? The 10 personnel, no tight ends, right? And to me, those two guys, having those guys allows you to do so many different things from a pairing perspective. And keep in mind, when Michael Mayer, Brock Bowers run out there on the field together, you have a running back out there. A team is going to say, okay, they have 2 tight ends, they have a running back, they have 2 wide receivers. Well, we need to get into base defense. All right, we're going to take the slot out. We're going to get into base defense. We're going to throw 3 linebackers out there on the field because they're getting into their heavy package. But the Raiders can come out in an empty formation with that, right? You can have those 2 tight ends lining up to the inside the slot. You can put Myers and Adams on the outside of them. You can put Dylan Wabi in the slot as well. He's played wide receiver in the past. In college, he's made people miss. The Raiders are going to be a versatile offense this season. And that doesn't include Trey Tucker. And it definitely doesn't include it definitely doesn't include Michael Gallup, right? And I think Michael Gallup's also kind of a wild card here. Today, we got Edgar Bennett, who's our wide receivers coach, talk a little bit of Michael Gallup. And he said that he has tape, and he's a proven vet, right? That he's basically put it out there.
But Gallup, he has tape. He's a proven vet in this league. He's been extremely productive. And so we're looking for him to continue to build on that.
So Edgar Bennett believes that Michael Gallup has shown us a ton. And, I've watched some of his tape this past season. He didn't look as good, right? He struggled a little bit with blocking and effort and those type of things. But keep in mind, this guy is coming back from an ACL injury. This past season was one of those years where, you're just trying to get back into form. At the same time, he was replaced by Brandon Cooks. Right, the Cowboys brought in Brandon Cooks, and they kind of had him take the number 2 job over Michael Gallup. And Gallup just never got it going again, right? But Gallup's coming to the Raiders, and it's clear that Edgar Bennett has confidence in Michael Gallup. And to me, the Raiders have so many playmakers, man. There's 4 wide receivers between Gallup and Davante Adams and Jacoby Myers and Trey Tucker. You got 4 wide receivers that I think, obviously Adams is Adams, but the other 3 guys could probably be number 2s on pretty much most teams out there. Right? Trey Tucker has massive upside. I know he's not there yet, but he flashed last season. We saw what this guy could bring. Those are just the 4 wide receivers. We have 2 really, really good tight ends. We have some running backs as well that can possibly have success, right? I think the Las Vegas Raiders are so deep this season across the board, and I'm excited to see what kind of happens as we go forward. Obviously, there's going to be a lot for the Raiders to figure out, not only during this season, but going into the next offseason. There's going to be a lot for us to figure out with the cap situation and those type of things. But I think this team right here is the best team we're going to have, even going into future years, because this team right here, the cap is under control. There's some contracts that are backloaded. So I'm excited for it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. And if you did, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.